About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
This is Noetic Moments, the show that explores what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be much fuller if we understood it better. And I am Ruth Miller, a longtime student of consciousness, cybernetics, and culture, and through this series of programs I'm introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research, and I'm explaining some of their ideas and experiments. I'll also explore some relevant news items and answer questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. And Noetic is spelled Noetic. Now, over the course of these programs, we've learned that although the medical world defines consciousness as what we're aware of at this moment, most of what goes on in the mind is not in our conscious awareness at all, but goes on in unconscious processes. From Jung and Freud and other early researchers, we learned that our minds can be thought of as having three aspects: our normal awareness, the conscious mind, what keeps our bodies going and includes our fears and beliefs about threats and dangers, which is the subconscious mind, and what connects us with our highest ideals and guides us in our actions, the superconscious mind. We learned that we can change our state of consciousness, so we're aware of different aspects of mind at different times. And then we learned that the brain modifies whatever sensory signals it receives to fit past patterns of experience, following a default network or structure of neurons in the brain. This means we perceive, we see, hear, and feel what we expect to experience based on the past. We also saw that our body often responds faster than nerve impulses or chemicals can travel, even before we're aware of it. And some experiments have demonstrated that a person's mind continues to perceive and process for as much as several hours, even when the brain and heart are flatlined and the person has been declared dead. And we learned that no one has yet been able to pinpoint how ideas and thoughts are formed in brain tissue. Based on all of this, many scientists have come to accept that what we call mind is not the product of the electrochemical activity in the brain, but is, in fact, the activity of a field that surrounds and permeates the whole body. This field may be at least partly electromagnetic because it's possible to measure electromagnetic activity for several inches around the body in what some say is an egg shape, extending from below our knees to a few inches above our head. Mind, then, is a field, a pattern of energy that exists whether the body is functioning or not, and permeates and develops with the body and brain. The brain, therefore, is best understood as a receiver-transmitter, receiving messages from the mind and transmitting them into the body, and receiving messages from the organs and senses and transmitting them to the body and the mind. Now, every field is a unique pattern of vibrations that's different from other fields and may vibrate along similar patterns with those other fields resonating with each other. And we've learned that this field of mind can affect both energy and matter in a variety of ways. For example, experiments in quantum physics, where the subatomic building blocks of the universe show up as energy or as matter, depending on whether a mind is present to observe them. As people's bodies and pets that have been observed to change when someone they're connected with turns attention their way, even when they can't be seen or felt. Individuals have changed the patterns of numbers in what should be random grids on their computer screens or printouts. And the collective human mind changes the readouts from random number generators on the network of computers that's run by the Global Consciousness Project. As a result of all these, we've heard from a growing number of scientists who are seeing our individual mind as part of a larger field. They're equating mind with the quantum or zero-point field, out of which all matter and energy arise. And some researchers are using the equations of quantum mechanics, as well as relativity and computer learning algorithms, to describe the role of consciousness in the formation of matter. These understandings help us understand things like the law of attraction, how the world around us mirrors what our consciousness is focusing on, how we can access information in the quantum or akashic field through insight, intuition, and channeling, how dreams affect the body and our consciousness, how music affects the brain and the body and our connections with other fields of mind, the role of our state of consciousness in the healing process, how the belief in a treatment helps a patient experience healing, how remote viewing and telekinesis must be happening, how we can get into a state of flow in which the mind and the brain are in sync and maximize our effectiveness, and how the two hemispheres of our brain are involved in the information received from the world and from our mind. You can catch up on our past shows on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll find links to the clips and books and authors that I mention with each show. Over the past couple of weeks, over the past almost 2 years, we've been developing a model of consciousness that separates the brain functions from that of a larger field we're calling mind. Now, in many worlds, many cultures, what we're calling mind might be called spirit, and accessing that knowing, that deep knowing, can be called spirituality. There's one medical doctor, a psychiatrist who has worked in mental hospitals and worked a lot with people dealing with spiritual emergencies and psychotic breaks, who has written a few books that is trying to explain how it is that the brain interacts with and is designed to express what is going on in the field that we've been calling mind and that others might be calling spirit. And of course, she's run up against a lot of distress in the scientific world because right now many people are committed to what some of us call science-ism, which is to say the material study of material objects, and nothing immaterial doesn't exist. The only problem with that is, well, the field of gravity, electricity, a few other things like that can't be measured in the ways that they would like to be able to. They're working on it, but they are still non-material. So fields, in general, is a difficult idea in the current dogma and doctrine of the practice of science.
Whether you're talking about genotyping or MRI studies or long-term clinical course studies, science is a form of observance. And we can point that lens at just about any question. And the host of questions are broad. We can ask questions that are compelling and new, or we can repeat the same questions we've asked 100 times before. The questions we ask live within the imagination of the scientist. So the limitations that science faced on turning our lens to ask questions of spirituality in the human life were limitations of the culture, the climate, the vogue in which scientists were immersed. They were not limitations of the scientific method. Now, with the shift in culture came a shift, really the thaw in the Ice Age of the imagination of the scientist. And as culture really, in some ways, academia was the last to the party. Our culture became much more spiritually aware before academia got on board. And as the group of scientists who were early in this transformative process, being amongst those labs that really brought the lens of science to spirituality in the human life, Still to this day, I can say there's a number of scientists who've yet to separate the difference between the scientific method and the vogue tastes and appetites and the culture around academic science, which are actually sort of implicitly, latently secular material. There's no reason that the scientific lens has to be limited to interpretations or understandings that are simply, I don't mean materialistic, although that can come with material, but material, only that which we can touch, which we can point to. I literally have friends who are scientists who say that because you've shown the neural correlates of spirituality in the brain, we now know spirituality is real.
Mm-hmm.
That is a limitation in the culture of scientists, not in our method. The awakened brain that we have allows us to tap into the deep field of consciousness where there's a unity in and through all life. Right? At times you can almost feel the rhythm. There's a single rhythm in and through life. Every other living being is tapped into this field of consciousness. Every other living being is in deep communication and aware of one another. And I'll give you an example by way of a story. One day I'm kayaking down the river by my house, and it feels so empowering. It feels so good, and it's a day with very high waves. It was one of the highest days. It was March, right after the thaw in Connecticut, where I live. And suddenly I hear, "Arrah! Arrah!" And 2 or 3 geese are looking at me and then bending their neck way to the side, as in go right, go right. And, I'd have to be arrogant beyond words to not listen to 3 geese calling in unison saying go right. So, of course, I paddled right, narrowly to avert a huge, barely covered cement impediment in the middle of the river. The geese saved me from capsizing. They probably saved me from worse, right? I go further down the river, new geese, arrr! Again, warning me that there's these deep pylons right underneath the surface of the river. I steer again. Further down the river, no more geese. I hit a pylon. I flip over. My kayak's full of water. I look up and there's 2 humans on the shore. They look at me, flailing in the water with my capsized kayak, turn their back, get in their Mercedes, and drive away. Every other living being who I've encountered is able to tap into this unit of consciousness. And we have the capacity. We're all endowed with an awakened brain. We need to choose to use it, to flip on the switch and to be in deep relationship with all the other living beings. I can tell you 100 stories where this is yet to be, the switch is still on in childhood. So young children up until really puberty, when they get a strong message that this deep form of awareness isn't real. It's really the greatest violation our culture hands a young adult, that your deep unity with all life isn't real. But up until that point, children are in relationship with all living beings. So we are the ones who've gouged out our eyes. We are the ones who are deaf to the call that every other animal hears. And we have a choice. We're already built with what we need to dial right back in to the family of life. We already built to be in relationship with birds, to be in relationship with geese and all other animals. We're in relationship with our own dog and maybe our cat.
Yeah.
But if you can be close to your dog, then certainly you can be close to a goat or a cow or a squirrel.
Clearly, this woman is animated by her subject, and she is absolutely committed to that form of cosmological metaphysics that we call panentheism. We talked about that when we were talking about the quantum field and mind. And she is committed to the notion that the brain has receptors in it, is designed to be able to receive information through what we call spirituality. That the brain is a mechanism for doing so that has been trained by our culture not to do so, not to connect, not to feel those connections, not to see them, not even to perceive any form of support for the idea. So, as we go forward in our own work and we realize that what is needed is to retrain the way the neural network is structured in our brain, we can go forward in confidence with the realization that the brain is designed to do this And it will generally tend to move in that direction as we give it permission to. And I think that's really delightful. Well, if you just tuned in, you are listening to Noetic Moments, produced here in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon, where we explore the nature of consciousness, what it is, what it does, and how our lives could be far more wonderful if we understood consciousness a little better. And that sound tells me that it's time to shift gears, to look at a book, to answer some questions, to talk about what's in the news. And the book that I thought we would look at today, surprise, surprise, we actually referred to some time ago, and it is The Awakened Brain by our guest speaker today, Lisa Miller. It was published in August of 2021 by Penguin Random House, and the subtitle is The New Science of Spirituality and Our Quest for an Inspired Life. Lisa Miller is a PhD. She says in her dedication, "Never cease to stand like curious children before the great mystery into which we were born," by Albert Einstein. Her table of contents is relatively straightforward. And she tells a story that is lovely about how her son found a dead bird, and when he was 5 or 6, kindergarten, first grade age, and as most children do, he decided it needed a burial, so he got a shoebox. He lined the shoebox with leaves, and then he took it down to the river to let it be carried on down the river. And as he put it into the water, Dr. Miller says, all of the birds in the surrounding area, and it sounded like hundreds, started singing and chirping as this one bird was given its burial rites. Isn't that beautiful? That introduction, she talks about 2012. She's talking about what's going on in her laboratory at Columbia University Medical School, where she teaches psychology. And she says her statistical analyst caught up to me in the hall, his eyes wide, a stunned expression on his usually composed face. He held a stack of papers in his trembling hands. "I ran the data many times," he said. "It's all very surprising." Then she says, for close to a year, our team had been working long, hard hours to design and implement a cutting-edge study to peer into the brain and learn more about preventing depression. And then she talks about collecting the data, modeling the findings, running the numbers, and today he would show us a first glimpse of the results. She goes on to explain how all kinds of things are weird. She says, we live in an age of unprecedented mental anguish. Depression, anxiety, and substance abuse have reached epidemic proportions globally. In 2017, 66.6 million Americans reported binge drinking within the past month, and 20 million met the criteria for substance use disorder. And she talks about the incidence of issues amongst college students, and she's talking about all these people. With that as context, she says, I hoped that today's lab meeting might reveal even an inkling of a sustainable solution to our devastating crisis in wellness and mental health. She says, we had taken MRI scans of people at high and low genetic risk for depression to see if there were any patterns among the brain structures of depressed and non-depressed participants that could allow us to develop more targeted and effective treatments. And we'd added a new and controversial question to our study. We'd asked all participants to respond to a major question used in the clinical science literature to quantify inner life. Quote, how personally important is religion or spirituality to you? End quote. And then she goes on, in addition to comparing the brain structures of depressed and non-depressed candidates, we wanted to see how spirituality was associated with brain structure and how spirituality correlated with risk for depression. So in this, she is defining spirituality as religious activity and or as being connected to something that is greater than ourselves. So she says, my eyes raced over the page, taking in the results, looking for whatever it was that seemed to have rattled my statistician. It took only a moment for me to see it. On the top half of the page was a black rectangle with 2 brain images inside. The scan on the left showed the composite brain image of all our participants with low spirituality, those who had reported that religion or spirituality was of medium, mild, or low importance. The scan on the right side showed the composite brain of participants with sustained high spirituality, those who said religion or spirituality was of high personal importance. The difference between the 2 images, she says, made my heart race and my spine tingle. The brain on the left, the low spiritual brain, was flecked intermittently with tiny red patches. But the brain on the right, the brain showing the neural structure of people with stable and high spirituality, had huge swaths of red, at least 5 times the size of the small flecks in the other scan. The finding was so clear and stunning, it stopped my breath. So that, she says, was a pivotal moment on the way to my breakthrough, a discovery that each of us has an awakened brain. So she says later on, when we awaken, we feel more fulfilled and at home in the world, and we build relationships and make decisions from a wider view. We move from loneliness and isolation to connection, from competition and division to compassion and altruism, from an entrenched focus on our wounds, problems, and losses to a fascination with the journey of life. She wasn't interested particularly in spirituality when she started, but these results woke her up. And I think it's very interesting because the word Buddha means the awakened one, the one who has broken out of the cultural trance and is seeing, as she said, from a much brighter place with compassion. The book is very autobiographical because she's trying to say, look, I'm a traditional scientist. I've been working on wards in various hospitals. I understand. But then she started to realize that there were a lot of things that didn't quite work. So her experience in those hospitals where people mostly were returning again and again was that if they understood that she was open to hearing about what really mattered to them, they would pull her into quiet little corners and explain that it was some kind of spiritual life that really mattered to them. And she realized that she was beginning to have a different kind of experience. Now, this woman is an athlete. You could hear she was out kayaking in very choppy waves, not something most of us would be willing to do. She also is a long-distance runner. She is looking at ways that the body, a healthy body, is reacting to the world around her. And what is it that makes for joy when the world around us is pushing us toward more distress, anxiety, or so. So The Awakened Brain by Lisa Miller, Ph.D., no relationship with me, published by Penguin Random House, and available in all the usual places, with all the usual, oh, this is wonderful kinds of things, including from Deepak Chopra. So it says, whether it's meditation or a walk in nature, reading a sacred text, or saying a prayer, there are many ways to tap into a heightened awareness of the world around you and your place in it. In The Awakened Brain, psychologist Dr. Lisa Miller shows you how, weaving her own deeply personal journey of awakening with her groundbreaking research. Dr. Miller's book reveals that humans are universally equipped with the capacity for spirituality and that our brains become more resilient and robust as a result of that. Yes. Well, we are out of time for today. I hope you found that useful, and I hope you will follow up and listen to her and maybe even read some of what she has to offer in your own quest for shifting the default network in the brain, and allowing yourself to experience a state of consciousness in which the mind, the unlimited field of mind, is accessible to your body and your life. That's it for today's show. Thank you for listening to Noetic Moments, produced here in the studios of KXCR in Florence, Oregon. And I'll look forward to checking in with you again. In the meantime, have a great week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic Sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.